When I was a junior in high school, I had a 1963 Ford Falcon convertible. Oh my gosh. And the song came out, King of the Road. And I thought, I'm king of the road. It was something every day at school, I would drive up to the parking lot with the top down, pull into the parking lot, thinking I was one cool guy. And then it was time to turn the car off, and I pushed the magic button, and as if from nowhere, the top came up, down impressively, and then you clamp it to the windshield, and it was really something. And one Friday night after a football game, about 5 or 6 of us went up to the school parking lot, and we were racing up and down the parking lot at night. And it was a sort of a torrential thunderstorm going on in Houston. What could possibly go wrong? Now, you would think that one of the young men might think this is probably not a good idea to be racing up and down the parking lot during a torrential thunderstorm in Houston. Unfortunately, there were no smart young men present. And so we went up and down in the darkness of the cloud cover. There was no stars, no moon, just the rain coming down, some faded lights off in the distance. And one particular time, I went all the way down, racing down, and made the U-turn. And when I started to come back the other way, I heard a very loud clunk. And I thought, that's not good. And I turned the car off, and I'm trying to peer through in the darkness and the rain coming down and the windshield wipers on hyper. And I see this volleyball pole sticking up in the middle of my car. And I'm thinking, that's not good. I don't think it's supposed to be there. So I got out of the car and in the rain and looked around, and the volleyball pole was cemented into a tire, and it had barely been dented. However, I could not say the same thing about my car. The front bumper had been dented back into the radiator. The hood had been dented back into the radiator, and the grill was basically destroyed. And then I looked at the radiator, and I could see antifreeze coming out of the radiator, and thankfully I live close by. I can get this car home before it overheats, which I did. Now, when I got home, then I had a second problem. And that was, how am I going to tell my father and my mother and my 15-year-old sister and my 12-year-old brother that I ran into a volleyball pole with my car? And so let me just say that it was kind of a combination of parental anger and sibling sarcasm and abuse. But it became one more story in what my family calls the folklore of Seth stories. Now, in this story, a true story, there's a metaphor here of our series that we're doing and of today's message. And think of 3 categories that we talked about last week. Category 1, all of us have desires for satisfaction, fulfillment, a sense of value and importance. That was certainly true of me. Category 2 is we all have strategies of how we're going to feel important or valuable or loved. But eventually our strategies backfire, strategy B. And then finally we have what's the fix, which is what we're doing as we look at this series here. What is real Christianity? If you think real Christianity is about being religious or a religion, you are not going to find much return on investment in Christianity. If you think real Christianity is about rules for living for do-gooders or prohibitions for bad doers, you're not going to get much return on Christianity. Or if you think of it, it's a way to help me feel worse about myself than I already do, you are not going to get much return on investment with real Christianity. Instead, what real Christianity is meant to do, the return on investment from a human point of view, not God's point of view, but from a human point of view, is these 3 categories. Category 1, we think about satisfaction. Category 2, there's some strategy or strategies that we go about trying to get that met, and there's a solution and a strength when our strategy isn't working. So for me, on that night of high school driving my car, my satisfaction was, looking back, a sense of importance. I'm one of the guys that got something together, pretty sharp fella. My strategy was to race my car up and down in a torrential rainstorm in the darkness. and it did not work. It backfired. And then category 3, the solution or is someone or a different power that I need, which I turned away from. I just doubled down on my strategy. Another way of thinking about the 3 categories, let's go to the next one, is there are personal needs we all have. We have poor methods that we are doing. They seem like they should work. They ought to work, but they don't eventually, and we need a different kind of power. Or another way of thinking about this is that we're all seeking some type of fulfillment, but the strategy we're using, category 2, is there's something faulty about it, and we need a fix, an internal fix. Or you can think about we have desires, and the Bible talks about our depravity, that we screw this up. There's something wrong in the strategy that needs a fix, a new dynamic in us. Or we are thirsty. We looked at this last week in particular. Troubles come our way that should awaken us to our need for God. And we need transformation inside. Well, that's what we're going to look at today in another story. And as we read this story from John chapter 8, there is a nameless woman and a nameless group of men. And we're going to read this story first. And what I want you to think about is what's going on inside of the woman and what's going on inside of the men. What is each of their category 1 strategy or desires or satisfaction? What are they looking for? And strategy, what's their strategy? What do they think will bring that about? And then what's category 3? Is it working or is it not working? What will they do when it doesn't work? So we start with John 8, verse 2. At dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him. He sat down to teach them out in public. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees, our men for the story, brought in a woman caught in adultery. There's the woman. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say?" They were using this as a question, as a trap. This question as a trap, in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time. The older ones first, until only Jesus was left, and the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up again and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" And she speaks for the first time. "No one, sir," she said. "Neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Now, as you hear this story, this seems like 2 very different worlds of people. You've got the woman who's the adulteress. You've got the men who are religious leaders. And they live sort of what we would say in different worlds. But in reality, because they and all of us are made in the image of God, there are similarities with the woman and the men. And the similarities are these 3 categories of life. Both want some type of satisfaction. Both are looking for some way, a strategy of getting that satisfaction or importance or their love, some way, and then there's a result. On the inside of your handout, let's look at the woman first, and then we'll come to the men. Category 1 is satisfaction. The teachers of the law and Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. Now, we don't know anything about the woman other than what is said here and when she speaks. We don't know if she was married and was committing adultery with a married man. We don't know if she was married and committing adultery against her husband. If she was married, we don't know anything about her marriage. I'm assuming she was married. And if she was married, like any woman, down in the heart, category 1, a woman wants to feel loved, cared for, understood, seen, heard. All of these things are sort of in this category 1 down in the heart. But at the very bottom of the feminine soul, the great fear that women have is the fear of rejection, of abandonment, of being unseen by the people in her world. And so this is sort of the longing that we find with this particular woman. There is within her an unconsolable ache that is true of every one of us, not just in bad marriages, but even in the best of marriages. There are times when you can sense this ache inside that no matter what you do, you can't get that ache completely dealt with. And that's by design. Only God can meet our deepest needs and longings, not even the best of husbands in this case. Which brings us to category 2. What strategy did she have? Well, her strategy, there's an A and a B. Strategy A was to find Mr. Right. Seemed like a good thing. A lot of people seem to do that. Does it work out for them? And somewhere along the line, Mr. Right turns out to be maybe not so right. And maybe Mr. Wrong come along the way. And we don't know anything about what the husband did or didn't do, but there's something in her that is even more unsatisfied than she was before. And so what she does is she doubles down on her strategy. Strategy was to find Mr. Right. Maybe this time I'll find a real Mr. Right, which she does. But strategy B is that our strategies, when given by human effort, by our effort, and involve other people that have to live a certain way or relate to us a certain way, eventually backfires. And this certainly happens with her, with Mr. Right, number 1, and right now she is living this backfire with number 2, Mr. Right. And she finds herself in a heap of pain. Proverbs 14:12 describes this element of what I call strategy B. There is a way which seems right, seems like it ought to work, could work, ought to work. Why couldn't it work? That seems right to someone, but in the end it leads to death. And the word death there is not just physical, although sometimes people make decisions like with overdose, where they make a bad decision and it leads to physical death. But what Proverbs is talking about is a different kind of death. It's more of a personal death. And this is what the woman has experienced in her marriage and is currently speaking in real time in our story as she is publicly humiliated and shamed, not just in front of the men or the religious or the people who are there at the temple, but also Jesus. Verse 3, they made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say?" Put yourself in the shoes of the woman. She's now at the temple. She's out there publicly. She's been drugged there by these men. And not just the men, but the people who are there at the temple to worship and Jesus all see her. She's publicly humiliated and shamed. Her strategy A has backfired tremendously. C.S. Lewis has said that whenever we go off to do something we think will meet our needs, even though we know it's wrong at some level, eventually what we're going to discover is that what we gained by going in that direction is precisely nothing. And I think he's right. Given enough time, all of our human strategies that depend on me or depend upon somebody else are eventually going to be lacking. Now, this is where the gospel shines, is category 3. This is meant to be where we land, where we need a solution. And the solution happens to be a someone with a capital S. This is Jesus, as we will see. Verse 6. Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote to the ground. Now, up until this moment, John tells us that after the first fellow asked the question, others continued to question Jesus about, what are you going to do? We stone her, not stone her? Do you believe in the law of Moses? What are you going to do? And at this moment in time, Jesus reaches down, stoops down, and writes in the dirt. We don't know what he wrote in the dirt. But something happens when he stands back up and says, he who's without the sin, be the first to cast the stone. It's as if God reaches down and hits the pause button. Nobody says a word. It's as quiet can be. Suddenly, the men are the ones who are being humiliated, not intentionally by Jesus, I don't think. But suddenly the lights shine on them, sort of like those World War II movies where the prisoner of war is under the lights and being interrogated. That's what's happening to these men. These men are now under the bright lights of being interrogated with one question. He who is without sin, let him be the first to cast the first stone. They are the ones who are going through this. And in that quietness, where Jesus doesn't say a word, the woman still looking down, because nobody who deals with shame wants to make eye contact with anybody. And as she's looking down, and in that silence, a new sound appears. A sound she probably has not heard before. It's the sound of thump, thump. 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 And one by one, they leave. They start to go away, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. There's something else that happens, another sound. I don't think she's still looking up, but she hears the sound of trump, 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 trump. Men starting to walk away, nobody saying a word. The sound of feet hitting the dirt, walking away. And then he says, woman, where are they? What an interesting question. It's a rhetorical question, not asking for information. And I think for the first time, she lifts her head just a little bit to peek around. And she says to herself, and he says, the second question, woman, where are they? They're gone. And then he asks, has no one condemned you? The third rhetorical question. She says, no one, sir. And then I think about, if I had been her, and nobody else had condemned her, and the only one standing left is Jesus, I would wonder, what is his evaluation of this going to be? Is the hammer about to fall now? Remember that Jesus had said, prefaced his question to the men, whoever is without sin, let him be the first to cast a stone. And they all disqualified themselves. The irony, the paradox here is that the only one who was without sin was standing there, and perhaps he still had a stone in his hand. And at this moment, she hears one more thump. He says, neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. And here is one of the most amazing moments in the Gospel of John. She finally meets the real Mr. Right. Somebody that sees her at her absolute ugliest and still loves her and wants to be with her and think that she matters. And this man stood up for her even when she gave him all kinds of reasons not to. She discovered, category 3, a solution. And the solution was someone. And then he finishes this story with, go now and leave your life of sin, meaning there's been a problem. Your strategy, A, has been faulty. You need a different strategy, and it's not to be wayward. Well, let's come to the men. Category number one is satisfaction. And when I think about with men, we're a little bit different than you ladies. Here, the deepest fear we have is not to be unloved or not heard or not valued. It's to be unimportant. It's to be a failure. To see ourselves as failure or to have somebody else think that we're a failure, this is down, in my opinion, at the core of the masculine soul. This is what we hate. And so what we do naturally is we find some way to mitigate against failure by being successful. However we define that, successful. Now, these disciples had also done the same thing. They wanted to feel important. And Jesus, at a different setting, gives us an inside look at the heart of these men, particularly, and generally with all of us as men. Matthew 23:5. Everything they do is done for people to see. Why is that? Want to be impressive. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. The things that they wore that signified that they were the religious gurus of the day, even those were impressive for reasons. They loved the place of honor at banquets. And the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace and to be called rabbi by others. Here you have in these three verses a summary of category one for men, honor, respect, the most important, and category two, how they think it's going to play out in the synagogue and in the marketplace and at banquets. When we first moved here to Irvine back in 1985, I joined a brand new Kiwanis club. There were 14 of us, and we met at the County Line restaurant that's no longer there over in Woodbridge. And there were about 14 of us, all about the same age. I was 33. We were all fairly young, marrieds, and had some little kids. And every week we went there trying to figure out what does it mean to be a Kiwanis club, service club, what are we going to do? But after I'd been there about a month or 6 weeks, the thing that was just overwhelming to me was that we, 14 of us, were not unlike these men Jesus just described. You could tell each one of us sort of had our own version of trying to look impressive in the room to each other. Each of us had our own version of strutting our stuff, whether it's marriage or children or physical or career. You know, we had this polished look. Everything was good. Everything was going great. Similar to these men. That was strategy. Strategy 2A was in place. The teachers of the law and Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery." Why not do this privately? They could have done this privately. Why publicly? In the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. What do you say? They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. Now, what's going on here? What's going on is similar to what we see in our culture today. If you're on social media, and it doesn't take very long to see this, social media is a platform for putting on this image of moral superiority or educated superiority or in the know superiority. And it's amazing how many experts there are on social media. All it takes is reading a couple articles and finally you're an expert on geopolitics or global economics or the oil industry or war and peace. It's amazing. And the language that usually is used on social media has this language of, I'm on the high ground, morally superior, educated. And the others, on the other side of this argument, they're the ignorant, the uneducated, the idiots. and then some other words maybe not as inspiring as those. Verse 6, they were not just trying to use the woman to prop up their own self to feel important, but even Jesus. They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. Well, on the back of your handout, strategy A turns to strategy B. Their strategy backfires, and it backfires royally. Verse 6, Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. They kept on questioning him. He straightened up and said to them, "Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time. And what you start to see is in this silence, they are slinking away back into the shadows. Their strategy has not worked. They sought to humiliate Jesus and humiliate the woman, and now they're feeling that particular sting of humiliation. Until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" Now, the question that you ask at the end of this is, well, what did they do with this? After this happened. With the woman, we have category 1, to want to be loved, cared for, a deep relationship with a man. That's strategy. With a husband, that failed. Adultery, maybe that will do it. That failed. But what she experiences there in that public setting with Jesus turns her life around. There's a solution that is a person, and she's experienced it firsthand with Jesus Christ. That there's something that happens in that whole episode and in that interaction with her that addresses her category 1 longings. It's an amazing thing. And what you sort of sense from the story is that softened her heart. Now, as the men are slinking off into the shadows, what is the effect of them? They want to feel important. Their strategy is to feel moral superiority by being negative and critical. And criticism is a powerful tonic, because it almost immediately allows us to feel that sense of moral superiority and importance. But one of the problems with that strategy is it backfires, and one of the ways it backfires on us. Because instead of a heart that softens towards people, it hardens towards people. Not just the people that we are critical of, but more and more people. In fact, so much so that just being critical can become personified in who I am. I walk around, for example, critical in my first thoughts about almost everybody. It's easy to become that person. I became that person as a young Christian in grad school. And when I realized this, I was mortified. What happens with these men? They aren't mortified by this. They double down on the strategy, as we'll see in the rest of the Gospels. Neither do I condemn you. The woman, the men, and you. Just a couple thought questions as we wrap up here. When you think about category 1, satisfaction, importance, fulfillment, value, loved, want to know that you make a difference, that you matter. Are there one or two of these that resonate with you the most? You find a hunger for these? And then think of category 2. What's your strategy? May not be conscious of it, like driving in a thunderstorm in Houston, Texas, on a very dark and rainy night, but the strategy is alive, with hopes that it will be met, but eventually our strategies backfire. For those who are critical, the effect is not just on me, but on my relationships. Distance eventually comes. For the men, what they needed on their solution was what we have on banner number 1. If you'd asked these men, do you know God? They would have all said yes. Absolutely, is what they would have said. But in reality, as you read the story of the Pharisees, is that they knew about God. They could write about God, but they did not certainly know him personally in a way that impacted how they thought or lived or related. They were a million miles from that. They doubled down on their strategy. Now, some folks have put together a video of this episode. And Scott, if we could, and Ron, if you could bring down the light and see this pretty well. It's a couple-minute video of this episode, and then we'll close. It's not enough to know about God, or to be able to talk about God, or about to write about God, or about to speak about God. Question is, do you know God in such a way that instead of relying primarily on the people in your life and on your efforts to get category 1 needs met, that your strategy really is to rely primarily on God? And unless that question is answered in the affirmative, you're going to find yourself just moving different strategy A's around the rest of your life, and a new strategy every time one of them backfires. This is what led me to Christ. I had about 7 strategy A's in college of the first 2.5 years. And thankfully, God went, ding. You think you're going to do this any smarter through your efforts or through people? It was an eye-opening moment for me. I not only needed a different strategy, I needed a different solution and a different power in my life. What about you? What would you say? Let's pray together. Father, thank you for this story. It's a powerful story that illustrates our human condition so vividly. Both our hunger and thirst for something good in this life, and our terrible, short-sighted strategies to try to make it happen. And that eventually, they backfire. And yet, like this woman, there is an opportunity for mercy and the wonder of grace. A door is open to discover God personally, and that only he can meet the deepest needs in our heart, that he is our primary source. And Lord, help us not to be like the men who doubled down on their strategy, certain they could make it work a different way, only to find through the course of their life and on into eternity the consequences of their strategies. Thank you, Lord. As we sang about mercy today and grace, thank you that you have, for so many of us listening to this, we have experienced this. We know this. We are thankful to you. Thank you for the ongoing transformation you are making in our lives in these 3 categories, category 1, 2, and 3. And we worship you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.